company were here when I did last year, so I appreciate the opportunity to come back. I've done several town hall meetings, including up at Iowa State yesterday, and I survived. Excuse me, today, this afternoon, I survived. I'm going to open it up just to questions. I'm not going to, you folks have heard all the speeches you need to hear, so I'll just open it up, because look, one of the things that I hear all the time, people are still in a decision-making mode, and you want to know what the differences are between the candidates. And so hopefully this will give you an opportunity to say, you know, okay, we're on this issue or what issue, where are you different, how you distinguish yourself, and hopefully help you make a decision as to what candidate you're going to support. So I'll be happy to take your questions. Yes, sir.
So what is your plan to reduce the size of the federal tax?
It's a combination. Number one is you have to grow the economy. You've seen actually the deficit come down from the highest heights that we saw early in the Obama administration to now. And the principal reason for that is growth. We were in a recession, we weren't growing at all. Now we're growing anemically, but we're still growing, and that actually shrinks the deficit more dramatically than anything else. We'll be introducing a plan here in the next couple of weeks, which will be a flat tax, across the board flat tax in this respect. It'll be a 20% rate on individuals, 20% on corporations, and 20% on capital gains. So there will be no need or no desire to move money around to get preferential rates like you hear about this carried interest provision. Everybody will be taxed at the same rate, and no one will have an increase in taxes. This will be a pro-growth tax plan. We will make sure that our distribution tables, which you know what that is, that's the you know, how each income area is affected by the tax rate. There will be no area that will see an increase in taxes. But it will have a dramatic effect on growth. We've been running the models on this. We're looking at probably 3 to 4 million new jobs created above what is projected to be created already in the economy. We're looking at wages going up anywhere around up to about 10% increase in wages. So it's a very strong pro-growth. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. We're circulating among economists right now, and I'm very excited about the feedback we're getting. That will grow the economy, which will, of course, increase tax revenues and reduce expenditures because people are now working and getting paid more and not having to be on government programs. Second, we have to reform entitlements. And there's only one person in this race who's actually gone out and done that. I was the author of the Welfare Reform Bill in 1996. We ended a federal entitlement. Name me another federal entitlement that's been ended. They don't exist. It's the only broad-based federal entitlement that's been ended. And I authored that bill when I was in the House, and I managed that bill as a freshman, first-year senator on the floor of the United States Senate, and fought with Bill Clinton through 2 vetoes to get it passed. And we have not come anywhere close to shrinking the size of government in a dramatic way since I was able to work and pass that bill. We need to do the same to all the other means-tested programs. Food stamps, it's now called SNAP, housing programs, Medicaid. All of them have to go through the same rigors of what we did with welfare, which is work requirements. So there will be a work requirement on everybody that receives these means-tested benefits, and a time limit on the benefit, and a block grant to the states so the states control them. That will be a major impact. Third, fourth, and fifth is Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. When George Bush called for a reform of Social Security in 2005, 2 senators came to the floor of the United States Senate and structured formal debates on the Republican side to try to drive that issue through the United States Senate. Jim DeMint and me. And I was representing the second oldest state in the country. And the oldest state in the country is Florida. Pennsylvania is second. And I always say this, Florida may have more seniors, but my seniors rely on Social Security more than they do. You know why? Because all my rich seniors moved to Florida. And so I had seniors who depended on Social Security, and I led. And so one of the things I want to communicate, whether it's all the entitlement reforms I've talked about, and I can talk about different things that we need to do with different agencies of government, which we can go through in detail, but if you're looking for someone that is not afraid to lead and has a track record of success, so that's the difference. A lot of people are willing to go out there and break heads. I have. But can you win? Can you succeed? Can you get things done? Carly said the other night that Washington is a fish tank, and people don't even know how much pollution there is in it. That's true. But guess who's going to be in that fish tank if they win the election? And you better be able to know where the sharks are. And you better be able to swim in that water. I'm someone who has been an outsider, come in there, shaken things up, gotten things done, and done it representing a state that is far more liberal than this state, and much tougher for a Republican to win. And if you're looking for someone who can do that, and has a track record you can trust. I said the other night when I was at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Chuck Grassley introduced me in Osceola the other day. At the time he introduced me, I wasn't that thrilled about the introduction, but the more I thought about it, I actually thought it was a pretty good thing, pretty good moniker to carry around. He got up and said, sort of, gave the old Chuck sort of hems and hawed a little bit and said, well, let me just say, I guess the best thing I can say about Rick Santorum is I've known him for 20 years and he hasn't changed. And for Chuck, that's about as high a compliment as you're going to get. Be happy to take the next question. Yes?
Getting Obamacare repealed. Now, when the Democrats got it passed, they did it completely partisan.
Yes.
No Republicans out. With your knowledge of the Senate, what do you think are the chances of getting at least a handful of Democrats to assist in getting this bad bill repealed?
I didn't answer that as part of your question. I should, because repealing the entitlement of Obamacare is another big part of saving money. And we can do it. All I would ask is that you make sure you don't have anything to say about this in Iowa because, well, you do. You have to re-elect Chuck Grassley. That's not a hard thing to do, I hope. If we have 50 Republican senators, we have 54 right now, but if we have 50, I have every confidence I can repeal Obamacare. Because I know how the Senate operates and I know what we have to do. Number one, we have to pass a budget. That sounds really hard. But the cool thing about a budget is it doesn't need to be signed by the president. It just has to be passed by the House as a resolution. It's not a bill. So you have to pass a budget. And in that budget, you have to have language that allows you to have savings in the area of health care. That's about as simple as I can explain it. That's called it. And then you pass a tax bill to reconcile the tax code to the budget. And you only need 50 votes to do that. You don't need 60 votes in the United States Senate to do that. Can I repeal Obamacare? I can repeal every penny of Obamacare. I can repeal every tax, every fee, every subsidy. I can't repeal all the language. So the language will say employers have to provide insurance, but there will be no penalty because the fine will be gone. So the bill will be gutted. We'll take the claws out of it, the teeth out of it, no ability to harm anybody. And in a sense, it becomes a neutered piece of legislation. And then you replace it with a system that is more free market oriented and allows support for those who have employer-provided insurance. We keep that in place, tax support for that. But we also provide equal support for people who don't have employer-provided insurance. This is something I've been pushing for about 15 years. Dick Armey and I, Dick Armey was the champion of the House, I was the champion in the Senate. Had Republicans listened to us and spent just a little bit of money in the tax code to provide help for people who don't have employer-provided insurance, we'd have dramatically reduced the number of uninsured and we wouldn't have had Obamacare. But we couldn't get that passed. I think we can get it passed now because it's a ton cheaper than Obamacare, and the combination of repealing Obamacare and putting something like this in will still save a tremendous amount of money and will put people back in charge of their health care. Second thing we'll do is robustly add to health savings accounts. Every Republican, if you look at every Republican health care bill, they all talk about the centrality of the bill is health savings accounts. I introduced health savings accounts 22 years ago. I fought for health savings accounts for 12 years and got them passed and got them added to, so now they're, even though Obama's trying to limit them, they're still a very viable form of health insurance in America. You put me there. You give me the opportunity to do what I did in Pennsylvania. In 1994, I ran against the Clintons. I ran against the person running the campaign against me. I ran against the Democratic incumbent. His campaign was managed by James Carville and Paul McGowan. Bill and Hillary were in my state. They probably paid taxes that year. They were in the state so much. And I ran against them on health care. And I ran on health savings accounts and the tax provisions I talked about, in addition to portability and some of the other things that you hear Republicans talk about. I ran against Hillary Care. The author of Hillary Care was my opponent. And in a state with over 1 million more Democrats and Republicans, with Carville, McGowan, Clinton ×2 in my state, I beat them. So I know who I'm running against. I've been there. I've battled Hillary Clinton on the floor of the Senate, and I've battled her in races, and we've won every time. Yes, sir.
both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have generated huge audiences. How do you explain that in terms of people turning out in big numbers for those two candidates? I'm not supporting, obviously, either one of them at all, but I just am wondering how you...
I'd say Bernie Sanders is doing what Howard Dean does. I mean, it's appealing to the hard left of the Democratic Party, and they're the activists. They're the rabid activists of the party. And he's appealing to young people. And when you go out and say you're going to legalize drugs and do all sorts of great stuff, you get people showing up at your events. And so I think he's the outsider. He's the guy that's shaking things up, and he's a socialist. And as we all know, you've seen surveys of young people in America today. The majority of young millennials now believe socialism is better than capitalism. And if you listen to this president, that's probably all you're hearing. So that might be one of the reasons. So I think that's why he's getting big crowds, because that's who they are. You probably saw in Chris Matthews just a few weeks ago, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was asked to explain the difference between a Democrat and a socialist. She couldn't do it. Because there is no difference in it. Bernie Sanders is the Democratic Party. He is who the activists cheer for, because that's who they are. And Donald Trump, I mean, you all know about Donald Trump. I'm not going to tell you about Donald Trump. Yes, sir.
I'll clarify my position a little bit before I ask my question. 4 years ago when you were here, I was a strong opposer to term limits. I now get up every morning thanking God for presidential term limits. What's your position on term limits?
I have been a supporter of term limits in my career, and I am the only person to have actually enacted term limits on the federal level. In the United States Senate, I came in 1994 after the revolution, in 1994, which I helped author with Newt Gingrich, and came to the United States Senate and proposed term limits. We couldn't get them passed in the Senate, but what I did do is I imposed them in the Republican caucus. And so I authored a rule change within the Republican caucus of the United States Senate to put limits on chairmanships and limits on leadership positions. So chairman couldn't stay in forever and ever. And the reason I did that because I realized, having served in the House a couple of years and watched Congress for a while, that members of Congress stay for a long period of time if they can hold power. And holding power means being a committee chairman or being in leadership. That's where the power really rests. And so if you limit the terms of those leaders, they end up leaving. And that's exactly what's happened. And so while I couldn't get the Democrats, not a single Democrat would vote for any kind of limits on terms for senators, and plus it takes a constitutional amendment to do it, which is a very high bar, I did get term limits in, and they have stayed in place since I left. Yes, sir.
Being a veteran, it's just come out now that there's soldiers in Afghanistan that are being punished for trying to stand up against the what's going on with the Afghan soldiers being pedophiles to young boys over there, and the commanders are telling them that's their culture, you need to leave it alone. If you were president, how would you fix that today? Because Obama's not going to do anything about that.
The rules of engagement that this administration has put on our men and women in uniform has jeopardized the safety and security of our troops. And the idea that, and I hear this from folks coming back, that basically you have to be shot at before you can return fire. If you see someone, even if they have a gun, you can't shoot at them. We put our men and women in harm's way, and then we ask them to desensitize themselves to injustice that a normal person would have to react to. We ask them to change their entire thinking of how they were raised, and not just dealing with the military situation, but obviously dealing with civilians. What kind of message are we sending of what America stands for? So I believe we should be a country that allows our men and women to fight and engage the enemy, understanding the enemy doesn't look like a traditional enemy, and I would rather be in a situation where we're not having to bring back body bags of Americans because they didn't protect themselves when they should have, as opposed to having to deal with a situation where potentially a civilian was killed in a hostile area. That's one change I would make. And the other change is I would let our men and women obviously deal with these situations in the way that they best see fit, given the situation on the ground, and not have that dictated from them. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Appreciate it. I think I answered that question over here. If that was, well, 71% of government spending is entitlements.
That's spending, I'm talking about the actual number.
Okay, if you want to get, okay, if you want, okay, he was talking more budget. You're talking actually size. Gotcha. Distinction. Several things. Number one, a 10% cut across the board of federal employees. But that's only a piece of the problem. The biggest problem that's happening right now is the explosion of contracted employees in Washington, D.C. You have folks who are not federal employees, but are federal contractors that are sort of off the books, and it doesn't look like the federal government is getting bigger. So one of the things that we would do is have a complete review of all federal contractors with the extent of eliminating, and this is big money for big corporations. I mean, you have folks that are making millions, if not billions of dollars through the federal contracting system. And so that's number one. Number two, this is very important. We haven't had an appropriation bill pass. A defense appropriation bill hasn't passed in 7 years. You know what that means? That means the Defense Department has to operate on contracts that are 7 years old. They can't bring in new contracts. They have to use existing contractors and run anything new through people who had contracts when the last time we had an appropriation. It is the most inefficient, it is a disaster in the Defense Department. So one of the things we have to do to do any of the changes, we have to actually pass in a regular order, instead of doing these continuing resolutions, we have to pass an appropriation bill. So we have to pass a budget, and then we have to pass these bills. And in doing so, then you can do reforms within the department. One department that I would shrink dramatically is the Department of Education. We went from 2% of education spending when I came to Congress. The federal government was responsible for 2% of education spending. It's now 11. And does anybody think schools have gotten better in the last 20 years? Okay. We need to get rid of that spending, No Child Left Behind, Common Core, all of these things have to be taken out of Washington, D.C., shrink the Department of Education, and put the money back where it belongs, which is where the states, in fact, get rid of the money and let the states and local governments deal with it. Number two, transportation is another area we need to shrink. Do we really need the Federal Department of Transportation overseeing Iowa highway projects? Anybody believe that really as a value added? I'll tell you what's added, 20 to 40% of the cost. Anytime you have a federal dollar in a state highway project, it increases your cost by 20 to 40%. Why? Because they have to justify their existence in redoing it and putting all these federal costs which jack up the price of highways here. What I would do is take the federal gas tax, 18.4%, cut it to about 5%, 5 cents, excuse me. Use that money for critical infrastructure, highways, interstates that carry our goods and our people, and then cut the rest of it and send it to the states and let them do with it as they please. We need to shrink the size and oversight of government at the federal level that's overseeing government at the state level. Block granting the Medicaid program. There's all sorts of things that we can do to shrink the size. The State Department. I got criticized the other day because I said we should abolish the State Department. Obviously, you can't abolish the State Department. What I meant was that we need to get rid of the employees in the State Department because they are in my opinion, and I've worked with them for years, they are internationalists who do not look after the interests of America. And I know that's painting a very broad brush, but they deserve it. And so we need to go into the State Department, shrink it dramatically, and then build it back out systematically to put people in place who are going to represent the interests of the United States around the world instead of the interests of the countries that they become co-opted with. And that's what's happened there. So that's several examples. Yes?
I know you're not in the Senate any longer, but where would you come down on shutting the government down? I use that term very loosely because that's kind of a joke term when it comes to funding for alternatives.
Here's what I've always said. Whether you're a general in the Army or whether you're a general in the United States Senate or the House and you're doing leadership, you put together a plan, you try to execute that plan, and then you adjust as situations dictate. Anybody that says this is the plan and we're sticking with it no matter what has never fought a fight. Nobody fights that way. You're a fool if you fight that way. Here's the problem. We have a leader who's already surrendered before we started the fight. How do you fight a fight when your general says, we quit, before we fight? already says, no, we're not going to do this. Okay, enemy, we're going to attack you, but we're not going to attack you. We're only going to do it for a little while, and then we're going to stop. How many think we're going to win? That's what Mitch McConnell did. Mitch McConnell said, we're not shutting down the government. Okay, we've just lost. Now, we go out and say, oh, you know, we need to go and push and fight. But the leader just said you're going to lose. So the problem is, what's our strategy now that we've already lost? And that's why, look, I've been in that position. I was the number 3 leader in the Senate. I sat in those leadership meetings. And I've heard all of the excuses, all of them. Well, we can't win, you know. Okay, you want an inside story here? You want an inside story of what's really going on? All right, let me share with you what's really going on why. 20, 30 years ago, the Republican Party couldn't win the Congress for anything. We went 40 years without winning the Congress. We would occasionally hold the United States Senate, but usually briefly. But that's changed. We were always, if you think back, and some of you are great enough here to remember this, we were always the party of the presidency. We were very successful electing presidents throughout the 20th century. But now, we're not the party of the presidency anymore. What are we? We're the party of Congress. We now have, because of redistricting and the way demographics have worked, we now have solid majorities in the House of Representatives. And we probably will, certainly between now and the end of the next census. And maybe even beyond, the way things are structured. And we have a reasonably good chance, because of the demographic shift and the fact that the South is now decidedly more Republican, which it never used to be. We can actually hold a majority of the United States Senate now, probably going forward. Let me assure you, the leadership in the House, the leadership in the Senate, and the members of the House and Senate, they know this. Right? What is the most dangerous thing to a House and Senate majority? What is the only dangerous thing to a House and Senate majority?
Complacency.
A presidential what? No. To maintain your House and Senate majority, and I'm not being clear. The most dangerous thing is having a presidential candidate who gets their butt kicked. Because if you have a presidential candidate who loses by a large amount, guess what could happen? You could lose your majority. And so, what is the incentive for the Washington establishment is now the party of the Congress? The Republican National Committee, the Republican Congressional, all of the committees and people who operate all the time now in Washington in power. What are they looking for out of a presidential candidate? Someone who is safe. Someone who will get, no matter what, 47, 46. Isn't going to lose by a big number. Isn't going to beat Barry Goldwater. But you know what? If we don't nominate Barry Goldwater, we'll never nominate Ronald Reagan. We'll nominate middle of the road, and we'll lose. And they're okay with that. Because they'll win. That's the reality. When you say, what's the establishment doing? What are they thinking? How can they put forth a candidate like that? Because they don't really care about winning. They'll be happy to win. It'd be great if they win. And if they get 50.1% and they win, and if you look at it, that's what we've been winning with. But no one wants to take the chance to win big. Because that means we're going to shake things up. That means we're going to change the power structure. That means we'll have a conservative in there who will actually try to do something which will jeopardize them in their comfortable seats at home. That is the reality, ladies and gentlemen. That is the reality. I've seen it. I know why they aren't rushing to support me. Because they know I will kick butt and take names. Because I did. And they know I will try to get things done, and I will put them on the dime. Because I did. I sat in those caucuses as a United States Senator and got railed on by my colleagues for forcing them to vote on things that made it tough for them to go home. It happened over and over and over again. I'll never forget with impeachment of Bill Clinton. They all got up. I was up for re-election the following year in a tough seat, Pennsylvania. And I remember getting up one after another saying, we can't put our vulnerable senators at stake by having votes on this. And I remember getting up and said, don't do this for me. I would rather lose and do the right thing. than not vote and not go through what the Constitution requires and do the wrong thing.
One more question. Who's got it? Yes, sir?
Right now, U.S. foreign aid policy is a disaster. It's an obsolete concept. We still have to use it if we want to win the hearts and minds out there. This administration is totally emasculated. USAID, they have tried to take their idea of moral value on homosexuality and pull the foreign aid strings of countries like Uganda, despite the fact that it's the Ugandan army doing Obama's dirty work in Somalia. How would you reform the U.S. foreign assistance program to try to win the hearts and minds, and how do you use that strategically to beat ISIS?
You're absolutely right, number one. So I appreciate that. I was very involved in U.S. foreign aid. I worked with President Bush on his PEPFAR program, carried that, which is the Global AIDS Initiative that President Ford. I was the author that carried that bill in the United States Senate. And it did change hearts and minds in Africa. That program had, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, you should be proud of the fact that literally tens of millions of people are alive today because of that program and because of what the United States did and the leadership we provided. And we transformed Africa from a country that was going to be, a continent that was going to be hollowed out, where there would be no young people, to a continent that is now rebounding and in many places thriving. So we don't talk about that very often, but we really, foreign aid can work if it's done the right way. And I know everybody, Kate Grange, who's a congressman from Texas, always goes home and says, and I guarantee you I won't spend more than 5% on foreign aid. And she gets big cheers. Yeah, we don't. Well, the United States spends less than 1% on foreign aid. So it's sort of a joke. We don't spend a lot of money on foreign aid in percentage terms. We spend actually less than 1%. And the reality is, America is engaged in the world, and as you see, if we're not, lots of bad things happen. Because if we are not taking the lead in the world, someone else, ask Vladimir Putin, who just met with Bibi Netanyahu, whether there are others who will be willing to take the lead. Ask him who met with al-Sisi, who can and should be a friend of ours, who's the president of Egypt. But we don't provide them any foreign aid because, well, they overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood. And President Obama supports the Muslim Brotherhood. And instead of who the pro-Western, democratic-leaning people in Egypt wanted a coup to make sure that Sharia law was not imposed in Egypt, we're supporting Sharia law in this government, and we're not giving them the weapons. So where does al-Sisi go right now? He goes to Putin. So let me assure you, if we do not engage both with hard power as well as soft power, and soft power being foreign aid, others will be happy to fill in. China will be happy to spread their money around. They're doing it in Central and South America right now. And they're turning country after country into countries that used to participate economically greatly with the United States, into countries that are more socialist and are participating more and trading more with China and with Russia. This is the reality in our own hemisphere. So you will see a president who will engage on foreign policy and on foreign aid in a way that builds real bridges, that does not promote values from Hollywood, but promotes values that are consistent with our national security interests. Every dollar we spend in the State Department on foreign aid, every dollar we spend in the military should not be for social experimentation, should not be for promoting a particular social agenda, but should be for the national security interest of our country. I served 8 years on the Armed Services Committee. I chaired a subcommittee for all 8 of those years, and every single year we put forth a bill, and never once did the Democratic, my Democratic chairman was Joe Lieberman, all 8 years. And not one time did we have a piece of our bill changed without the two of us signing off. You can do bipartisan foreign aid. You can do bipartisan national security policy. You just have to engage. And what this president has done on national security, as he has on everything else, is created a toxic environment where there is no trust, there is no bridge building. I guarantee you, you give me the opportunity to be commander-in-chief, It's not an entry-level position, ladies and gentlemen, particularly not right now, when our country is on the brink and may, by the time January rolls around, be at war. You better put someone in who understands not just soft power, but understands the requirements of hard power. I was the author of the Iranian sanctions that put sanctions on Iran's nuclear program, the first one to do that. I did it and forced a vote. We lost by 4 votes. Kerry, Clinton, Obama, and Biden. And unfortunately, Condi Rice opposed it. We fought anyway and eventually got that bill passed. It was passed unanimously to put sanctions on Iran, but they weren't as tough as I originally proposed. For 12 years, I've been saying we need to use soft power and hard power to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. If you want to elect someone that Iran knows, I did an op-ed last year on Iran when the negotiations started, and the Iranian foreign minister responded to me in the paper. They know who I am. I've been fighting them for 12 years. ISIS knows who I am. 5 months ago in ISIS magazine was my picture under the words, in the words of our enemy. It was a very nice picture. And next to it was a quote defining who they are and why they had to be defeated. This is no time, ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you, this is no time to put someone in that office who the enemy doesn't know. Ronald Reagan was successful in 1980, walking in 1981 and being sworn in, and they sent the hostages back because they knew what they were dealing with. This is not a time. Let me assure you, they know who I am, and I know who they are, and I can defeat them. If you give me the chance, we can make this country great again. Thank you very much, and God bless you.